Approximately 1,000 kilometers from Miravet, in the heart of Europe, the order had an essential hub, Paris, the seat of the Templar province in France.
The province of France in the west was probably the largest, most important, and undoubtedly the richest province in the order. As a result, the architecture of the Parisian commandery was uniquely symbolic and ostentatious.
Surprisingly, historians don't know much about the Paris Temple, which had been studied very little and whose impressive buildings no longer stand today. But using brand new 3D reconstructions, we're about to show you how the temple complex was built, complete with an impressive wall surrounding numerous buildings and two powerful towers.
The Templars, whose main headquarters were in Jerusalem in the Holy Land, had to display just how important they were in their primary location in Western Europe. That's why they built an imposing complex, the size of which was unrivaled anywhere in Europe.
It all started with the lightning-fast establishment of a sizable presence in medieval Paris, which was much smaller than the Paris of today. Thanks to significant donations, later complemented by clever acquisitions, within 20 years, they became the second largest landowners in Paris, trailing only the mighty bishop.
In 170 years, the Templars managed to take possession of 1/10 of the city of Paris, a sign of their amazingly fast and impressive rise to power.
By the 1140s, they owned properties in the heart of the city on both banks of the Seine. Donations flooded in, from houses to mills and even ports.
The way the Templars settled in the city was very well thought out. They tried to establish ties with the powers that be, notably the king, but also to use their assets to their best economic advantage. For example, the port played a very important role. They used it to transport supplies to the capital from their properties outside of Paris.
Over time, as the medieval city filled up, they expanded onto the agricultural lands outside its border. First, they built the walls around the temple. Then they founded the Villeneuve des Temples, where the famous Marais neighborhood stands today.
They were the ones who designed the grid system of the streets. They created a whole new city there. The network created by the temples is still visible today.
Their implantation took the form of a massive temple complex built between the middle of the 12th and the end of the 13th century. The crenellated wall around it was 8 meters tall, 700 meters long, and reinforced with some dozen small towers. The entrance, which was protected by a drawbridge, was fortified by 2 towers. Inside the surrounding wall were a number of buildings, starting with a church with a round nave and an immense choir nearly 40 meters long and 20 meters tall. It was joined by an impressive cloister, a chapel, living quarters for the brothers, a hospital, a farm, and even a prison. But most importantly, the complex was dominated by 2 imposing towers. The first was built in the second half of the 12th century.
Caesar's Tower was an impressive sight. There were no other fortified buildings like it in Paris.
We know very little about this building, which has been brought back to life today via 3D reconstruction. It was a square tower measuring 9 meters on each side and nearly 25 meters tall, with a crenellated platform on top that was later replaced by a roof. The walls, which were reinforced with buttresses, and the massive interior vaults made it into an impressive safe where the temple's treasure was stored.
Medieval treasures consisted of silver and jewels. They also contain archival documents, books, and manuscripts, as well as relics from saints, which were also very valuable on an economic level. The Knights Templar received large monetary donations right from the start, not only from the king, but also from many lords, sometimes even from the Pope. As a result, they needed fortresses to keep those large sums of money safe.
But this tower was only the beginning of the demonstration of the power of the Templars. Around 100 years later, they would build an even more colossal edifice.
To the Parisians, the Temple Keep, the large tower, became a familiar sight. By the end of the Middle Ages and throughout the modern age, the building can be seen in the background of a number of miniatures, engravings, and prints. It stood out from the rest. We don't know of any other contemporary building as tall as this one. The only one that could compare was Notre Dame Cathedral.
Because of its large size, the keep was soon nicknamed the Big Tower by the Parisians, and it became a symbol of the Knights Templar in the city.
The proof of how important the tower was to the Templars is that they put it on the seal of the Paris Temple Commandery. A seal back then was a bit like a logo today.
Calling its dimensions exceptional is no exaggeration. The main part of the building was a square tower measuring 13.5 meters on each side and 4 stories tall. On the top was a crenellated rampart walk, itself covered by a pyramidal roof that reached nearly 50 meters. The 4 corners were reinforced by round towers over 5 meters across and topped with conical spires for a total height of nearly 45 meters. It was probably in these towers that the Templars stored their treasure.
We know that the tower was truly exceptional from a defensive point of view. We don't know much about the windows, but they were probably arrow slits. The walls were around 3 meters thick.
For a sense of scale, the tower was larger than the already impressive royal fortress of the Louvre, which had been built by Philip II of France a few decades earlier, itself being larger than Caesar's tower.
These castles and towers were a representation of the power of the people who owned and lived inside them. In the case of the Paris Temple Tower, it symbolized their pride, power, and wealth, both in the West and in the Holy Land.
So how can one explain that these monumental edifices built by the Templars simply disappeared off the map of the French capital? The Paris Temple was marked by 2 twists of fate.
In just a few years, everything changed. The arrest warrant for the Templars of the Kingdom of France, which was issued on the morning of Friday, October 13th in 1307, went into effect for Paris and the rest of the kingdom at the same time. More than 100 brothers were captured inside the temple.
These arrests were followed by the torture and by the death of many Templars, often in prison.
The fate of the Paris Temple was tied to the disappearance of the order in 1312 and the death of its last master, Jacques de Molay, who was burned at the stake on May 11, 1314.
The second twist of fate came 500 years later, when Napoleon ordered the Tower of the Temple to be destroyed. It had been used to imprison the royal family during the Revolution, and he feared that royalists would turn it into a pilgrimage site. The rest of the buildings inside the enclosure were razed over the course of the 19th century.